The room was softly lit as the first rays of dawn light crept through the transparent drapes. As the city below me slowly started to awaken, I stood by the open window and allowed the fresh air to fill my lungs. Everything seems very serene from up here. The faint murmur of early commuters leaving to begin their day, the distant tweeting of birds, and the golden light painting the skyline in a way that made everything feel feasible. I encircled the warm coffee mug with my hands and enjoyed the cozy warmth of it against my skin. I wasn't in a hurry for the first time in what seemed like forever. As though the day itself had chosen to slow down and give me a time to just breathe, the typical hectic flurry of emails, meetings, and to-do lists seemed like a faraway memory. I hurriedly changed into my running attire and set out to jog. Running had always been a routine that helped me stay grounded and gave me a fresh start to the day. Away from the bustle of the awake metropolis, I raced across the deserted streets. As the breeze moved through my shirt's thin material, it cooled my skin and gradually brought my pulse back to normal. A little message from Mike was on the kitchen table when I returned home. Off to work? We must discuss the weekend. It was short, dry, and cold, but I was accustomed to it. Mike was a man of action who was constantly preoccupied with his initiatives and frequently kept his thoughts far away from us. As I waited for the cup to fill after turning on the coffee maker, I noticed my reflection in the window. The huge office towers that awaited us in our own distinct worlds rose in the distance beyond the glass. Calls, meetings, and reports. Places that appeared to be inhabited by people but were actually more like machines. I pondered how Mike and I had found ourselves in this dead, sterile room. However, the morning continued. I quickly called a few people at work, scheduled several meetings, and arrived at my desk by 9 o'clock. With coworkers all around, everyone preoccupied with their own issues, everything went according to plan. I felt like something had changed inside of me, but no one noticed. I continued to read my emails during the lunch break. Normally, I would go for a walk or read a book, but today I needed some companionship. When I got back to my work, I noticed my Caitlin, a new coworker, is organizing some of her documents. She had just moved from one department to another. When she saw that I was observing her, Rachel smiled and added, "You seem a little distracted today." I answered, attempting to dismiss my thoughts. "Just a long morning. Perhaps you ought to rest?" Nodding towards the coffee maker, she made a suggestion. A slight change of scenery can be helpful at times. It was a very peaceful evening. It was quiet in the flat when I arrived home a little early than usual. It had been over an hour when I heard a faint knock on the door. Our neighbor from the same level, Ethan, was standing at the threshold. Recently, I was attempting to fix a stuck car lock in the parking lot when we happened to cross paths. "Sorry to bother you, Rachel." He started with a slightly clumsy smile. "I have a minor issue. I was wondering if you could assist me in fixing my apartment's power outage." Naturally, I grinned back. "I believe I can assist." I grabbed a torch and went to his house. It was a different atmosphere. It's cozy, but a touch disorganized. It gave the area a certain charm, even if it seemed like everything had been arranged at random. "I appreciate you coming over," I said. "It's nothing." Ethan's smile as the lights came back on was so genuine that I had to return the smile. His eyes had a special sparkle that I hadn't noticed in myself in a while. "You did an excellent job," he replied with a smile. "Would you mind stopping over for a coffee or a glass of wine?" I paused for a second. "Why not?" To my own surprise, I responded. The wine was soon poured into cups, and the discussion flowed naturally as we sat on his couch. Initially, we discussed trivial topics, who was working on what projects and how the neighborhood was run. But with time, the discussion became more in-depth, as though a trusting relationship had grown between us. I started talking about how I hadn't felt like myself in a while, how I felt like I was swimming against the tide, and how even my intimacy with Mike had become a formality. Ethan paid close attention, only occasionally interjecting with questions. I couldn't recall the last time I had been given such attentive listening. I eventually realized that I wasn't discussing work, plans, or issues for the first time in a long time. I was discussing myself and the things that were most important to me. "You know, Rachel," he added, giving me a contemplative look. "We occasionally reach a dead end in life, and forget that there is always another way. His comments resonated deeply within me. I remained silent since I sensed that there was more going on here than a glass of wine and talk. I couldn't quite pinpoint what had changed, but I felt a little different after that night. Ethan and I began to run into one another more frequently, whether it was in the parking lot or the corridor. He never failed to smile and find an opportunity to talk. I called Ethan out of the blue one evening when Mike was working late again. "Hey, I started. Not really sure I was doing this. I wanted to know if you were busy. I could spend some time there." Ethan made no hesitation. "I've just prepared dinner. Would you like to join me?" I was surprised by his invitation, but I accepted. What's wrong with hanging out with a neighbor after all? This is merely a visit. However, I had a hunch that this night wouldn't be that easy. His flat smelt lovely as I walked in. The air was filled with the smells of a freshly prepared supper. With a tiny table for two, the kitchen was comfortable. Ethan moved with such ease and casualness that I instantly relaxed. We discussed everything while eating pasta and sipping wine, from his pre-city background to our trips to the books he had recently been reading. After dinner, we sat down with our wine on the couch and the chat became more in-depth. Ethan began discussing his aspirations and how life had forced him to pursue a more pragmatic career path despite his lifelong desire to be a writer. I confided in him about my personal emotions and admitted that it had been a while since I had followed my own passions. We discussed lost chances and how difficult it might be to deviate from the beaten path. Ethan murmured, "You're so strong, Rachel," his eyes meeting mine and his voice growing softer. "You are someone who deserves better than to glide through life, in my opinion." I wasn't prepared for how deeply his remarks struck me. I wanted to reply, but I was at a loss for words. I sensed Ethan gradually approaching me in the quiet that lingered between us. When his hand touched mine, I felt a sensation I hadn't had in a while. Pay attention, warmth, sincere curiosity. Before I could comprehend what was happening, I felt his lips on mine as he leaned in. Even though it was a brief, gentle kiss, something inside of me changed. As the kiss intensified, we were engrossed in a warmth that seemed so different from our daily routine for the remainder of the evening. It wasn't only an actual moment, it was the sensation of reviving. When I got home in the morning, I was overcome by the apartment's silence. After shutting the door behind me, I took a moment to listen to my inner voice. After spending the night with Ethan, I felt conflicted. The weight of knowing what I had done and the joy of remembering. With him, I experienced a dazzling sense of freedom that soon turned to a suffocating guilt. I looked at the time. Mike had to return from his morning run shortly. I had just a few minutes to gather myself and remove the night's remnants from my face. A knot of shame grew in my chest as I sat on the bed. The man I had committed my life to had been deceived by me. Even terrible, though, was the fact that I was unable to express regret for what I had done. As usual, Mike arrived home with a bottle of water and his gym attire. He gave me a fleeting smile as though nothing had changed before entering the bedroom. And sure enough, nothing had changed for him. I was still a part of his calm, tidy world, and he kept living it. "How did your run go?" Trying to speak steadily, I asked. "I think we should meet with my colleagues next weekend," he said dismissively, as usual. "A little work-related event is approaching. Will you come?" Although his question was straightforward, it contained more than simply a weekend itinerary. It was an effort to preserve the progressively eroding version of ourselves that belonged to our family. I felt something tighten within of me as I nodded silently. The days went by according to their routine. I made an effort to return to my everyday routine, but nothing seemed the same. I couldn't help but think about Ethan. His eyes that night, his words. I discovered an envelope with no return address on my porch a week after that evening. There was a little note inside. "I am aware." A shiver went down my spine as I gripped the letter tightly. Someone was aware of what had occurred. My mind was in disarray as panic struck. Who might have noticed us? When I saw Mike again that same evening, I was terrified to look him in the eye for the first time in a long time. I couldn't get rid of the mounting uneasiness throughout the course of the following few days. I anticipated discovering a fresh envelope and a fresh danger each time I went to the mailbox. I wasn't mistaken either. I got another note 2 days after the first one. This will not go well. I was paralyzed by fear this time. I took the note home, where Mike was quietly working on his laptop, oblivious to anything else. However, I felt as though I could no longer manage everything since my world was collapsing. After the second note, I texted Ethan, even though I had refrained from speaking to him directly. The message only asked to meet. It contained no insinuations or allegations. When I entered the cafe, Ethan appeared anxious. As I sat across from him, I could feel our tension rising. Too many questions were racing through my mind, but I chose to begin with the most crucial one. I let out a breath, trying not to show my panic, Ethan. Someone is aware of us. Letters have started rolling in, and they're getting more dangerous. Do you know who could be responsible for this? Ethan scowled, his expression solemn. Letters? He seems truly taken aback. Rachel, I don't know who that might be. Is it someone from the building, in your opinion? Or, I'm not sure. I cut him off. But there's no doubt that someone spotted us. I'm being watched, observing us. And it's obvious that they want to take action. We must exercise greater caution, Ethan replied at last. If they're actually following us, this isn't a joke, but... He gave me a more certain glance. You realize that we must put an end to this? This has gotten out of hand. Despite all of my internal resistance, I nodded. The idea of abandoning our relationship brought a pain I wasn't prepared to confront, even though we both knew that it would only get worse. I tried to relax by looking out the window, but even now I couldn't get rid of the impression that someone was observing us. We decided to stop meeting and maintain our distance, but I discovered another envelope in the mailbox the following day. The note included more pictures this time, photographs of Ethan and I sitting in the cafe. Even when we believed no one could see, someone had been observing us. I was completely overcome with fear. My throat dried up every time I opened the mailbox. One more note, one further indication that someone was overly knowledgeable. However, discovering the photos was the worst part. The photos were taken in the cafe on the day that Ethan and I met, sharp, as though photographed up close. I was holding his hand in one of them. Our anxious expressions showed in another. It was more than I could handle. The choice was made in a flash. I got in touch with a private investigator that a coworker had suggested. From the beginning, he seemed to be a person who was not scared of problems. His name was Mark. I showed him the photos and the letters and told him what was going on. After giving them a thorough inspection, Mark promised to start working right away. About a week after Mark began his inquiry, I received a call from Ethan one evening. He spoke in a strained tone. I learnt something, Rachel. He started. He spoke quickly, as though he was worried about missing something. We must get together. This is significant. We frequently had coffee at the same cafe where we met. This will surprise you, but... The letters. The pictures. I was the only one. I have no idea why I did that. He spoke without looking at me. I assumed it would force you to make a decision. I kept quiet. An emotional maelstrom raged inside. Anger, dread, betrayal, and disillusionment. How might I be harmed by someone I trusted? Did you intend to frighten me? Trying not to cry, I eventually whispered. You truly believe that this was the most effective method to influence me to pick you? Ethan remained silent. His words were not as loud as his silence. I got up because I was tired of listening to his justifications. I was wounded. Realizing that the person I had been spending the last few months with had been so ruthless and cunning was even more painful. I felt like the world was crumbling as I walked out of the cafe. I strolled across the streets without paying attention to the automobiles, people, or streetlight shine. As usual, Mike was engrossed in his work when I got home. When I walked in, he looked up, and for a second I thought I detected a flicker of caution in his eyes. Are you all right? He put down his laptop and asked, You appear worn out, we must speak. I started, attempting to remain steady. I must admit, Mike, I've been disloyal for the past few months. Mike said nothing. He was attempting to figure out what to do with this information, as seen by the unreadable expression on his face. He looked right into my eyes and stated, I knew something was going on. Rachel, you haven't been here much in the last few months. I sensed it. I remarked in a shaky voice. I know you want to try, Mike. Furthermore, to be honest, that you have no idea how much it means to me. However, I can no longer live the way we did. Being the person I was with you is not something I can return to. I must acknowledge the fact that I have changed. Mike was silent for a while. I could see him struggle with his feelings for me, which he most likely still harbored. At last, he replied, "I get it. However, that does not negate the pain." Those words hung in the air between us, echoing around the room. Still alive outside the glass, I moved to the window and gazed out at the city. There was a path ahead. Not sure, challenging, but only mine. I was afraid, but I knew it was the right decision. I made the decision to go. I couldn't stay in the prison I had made for myself any longer, not because I desired someone else. Mike was entitled to the truth and the opportunity to find someone who would genuinely support him, something I was no longer able to provide. I turned to him and said, "I'm going to leave for a while. To figure things out, I need time. I hope we can find another way, even though I realize this is difficult, for us both."